Level up your LA Kings experience with the new Vivid Seats Elite Seats. All the on-ice Kings action with even more exclusive access. Enjoy great seats to the game along with premier dining inside the Lexus Club with all-you-can-eat food and non-alcoholic beverages. Plus, get a free Team LA Kings item and parking with your purchase. Score your Vivid Seats Elite Seats tickets today and earn rewards on each purchase from the only ticket company that rewards you for buying. Experience it live with Vivid Seats, the official partner of the LA Kings.
You're listening to an LA Kings podcast. For more episodes of this and every other Kings program, visit lakings.com/podcast.
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings. Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
All right, it is time for the half-season check-in on our top 10 questions, and originally this was set to take place after Game 42, but we've had a game postponed, so this is actually taking place after Game 41. So we are actually halfway through the season. Joining me today, Nick Nixon. How are you doing today, Nick?
Doing well, Jesse. Great to be back with you.
And, of course, Jim Fox. How are you doing today, Jim?
Doing fine, Jess. Thanks very much for having us again. And I know Nick and I, along with everyone, certainly in our group, we're traveling on the road, but we're still thinking about everyone back home. So let's try to give them some information, some good stuff, some positive stuff, some truthful stuff about the LA Kings, and maybe makes everyone feel a little bit better.
Okay, so before I reply to that directly, I do want to say you guys haven't been here, so you haven't been able to see it, but the donation drive that's been going on at Toyota Sports Performance Center has been really, really impressive. Every time I swing by, there's massive stacks of supplies waiting to be taken away to the YMCA. So that's been very nice. As far as the information and the truthfulness, Jim, I actually am kind of glad exclusively for the purposes of this conversation, am kind of glad that the Kings have lost 2 in a row heading into this conversation, because it has muted my enthusiasm a little bit. At the end of that 5-game winning streak, I would have said that there was nothing wrong with any facet of this team and everything's great and everything's fine. So the 2-game losing streak will provide perhaps a bit of perspective. So let's jump into the first question, and that is, how will the injuries impact the season? And I've altered that a little bit for this one to be, how will Drew Doughty's return impact the rest of the season? Because to this point, the injury to Drew Doughty has been the most important injury. There will always be a guy misses a game here or there. Trevor Moore and Trevor Lewis are out of the lineup for 10 games, whatever it is. But Drew Doughty has not played a game yet this season. Word is that he will join the team on the ice for practice very soon. And so I'll start with you, Jim. I mean, how have injuries impacted the season, and how will Drew Doughty's return impact the second half of the season?
Yeah, I'll just go with Drew Doughty's return. I think it depends on the way they approach it. Is he back in 100% right away, or do they ease him in? For instance, he would normally play on the penalty kill, right? Mm-hmm. Both, but penalty kill penalty kill's been really good, so there's no need to change anything up, at least in that area. The power play, of course, has not been going good, and when Drew comes back, maybe that's the way you get him some minutes. If it keeps going the same way until Drew comes back, then why not make some changes? Why not make some personnel changes? So that's what I'm just thinking about first is, 100% back in or ease him in. I have a feeling they'll ease him in, even though he's Drew Doughty, even though he's a Hall of Fame defenseman. I just think he's missed too long of a period of time to jump right back in. How it affects Spence or Clark, because those are probably the 2 guys that are going to be affected the most as far as ice time. If Drew comes back and plays right away on the power play, then I think that affects Brandt Clark more. They both play, both Spence and Clark, but Clark right now was on the first unit. If he doesn't come right back in on the power play, then I think it gives Spence a chance to play more because, ice time will not be affected. So that's what I see it so far with Drew Doughty and coming back, but just a matter of whether they want him back all the way or ease him in.
Nick, they can't be much better defensively. I see a bunch of people say, well, they're playing this well defensively without Drew Doughty. Imagine what it'll be when he comes back. I can't imagine him coming back makes them exponentially better defensively, and now all of a sudden they're allowing one goal per game on average. Like, I just don't see that. So it seems to me the only realistic way that his presence in the lineup can, statistically improve the team would be on the offensive side, because he is a good offensive player.
Yeah. And I think over the years, we've always heard people talk about it's easier to defend with a group of players than it is to score with a group of players, because scoring involves skill and not everybody has that skill.
Right.
So I think we're all on the same page. It will help the Kings offensively with Doughty in there. If the power play is still 15%, which is where it's been now for a while, when Doughty comes back in a couple of weeks, he's got to be on that first unit, only because he's been there in his career, and you've got to figure out how to make it better. And that would be choice number one, unless they make a few changes up until he comes back. The other thing is who he plays with. I mean, the pair of Anderson and Gavrikov have been fabulous. But I think in a perfect world, every coach would like to have that lefty-righty combination. So that's where it gets a little dicey for me, because I think Edmondson and Clark you would keep together. Joel Edmondson kills penalties. Jim touched on the fact you don't have to rush in Doughty in doing that, because Edmondson has killed penalties well. Anderson, Gavrikov have all season long. So those are your three defenders killing penalties. So if you keep Anderson with Gavrikov and don't reunite Doughty with Anderson as partner for 3 years, then who plays with Doughty? Good problem to have, but to me, I think right now, when I'm looking at Doughty coming back in the lineup, I'm looking for him to give the offense a boost, particularly on the power play, more so than giving the defense a shot in the arm.
I think, Nick, you brushed up pretty perfectly against the next question, which is, when Drew Doughty returns, how will the D-Corps be deployed? Jim, I'm assuming we'll stick with the 11-7, and that will give them a better opportunity to work Drew Doughty into the lineup slowly, rather than tossing him in there to play 26 minutes a night.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I think upon return is the way the question was posed.
Mm-hmm.
I think that changes as Drew gets more and more used to the rigor of an NHL schedule and he gets back to 100%. But the way I see it right now, and Nick touched on it, but the way I see it is when it gets back to normal, it's Anderson, Doughty. Believe me, before the season started, I think I'm a pretty big Brant Clark fan, and I thought it was going to be Gavrikov Clark, but Edmondson, you just can't break it up. Joel Edmondson has come in, and I think he's exceeded expectations. We know what he can do, but the effect he has on this group, I think, is even multiplied because the Kings rely so much on defense, and he's a stay-at-home guy, so he gets it done. So I'd say that, and then I'd say Gavrikov, Spence, and then you have that extra. I think it also, though, it does open up the door for a lot of specialized time on ice, meaning late game situations. We've gone over who's going to be on the power play, but the penalty kill. You can have Anderson and Gavrikov, depending on who's in the penalty box, who's tired, who's had the most ice time that night, all those things. That's where it really strengthens your group when Doughty comes back, because then from night to night it might change, but then you have a real solid group of guys that you can confidently go, especially from the shutdown of Anderson, Edmondson, and Gavrikov. Through a 60-minute game, that's pretty good options to have on every single pair.
Nick, if you had given me this stat at the beginning of the season or middle of the summer or whatever, I just would not have believed you. Joel Edmondson's played more minutes than Adrian Kempe, Anze Kopitar, and Kevin Fiala. Currently, he's third on the team at 20 minutes and 37 seconds per game behind Anderson and Gavrikov, and I just wouldn't have based on the role they brought him into play to pair with Brant Clark, role that I think everybody assumed would be the third pair, with maybe spot duty on the penalty kill. For him to carry that kind of minutes load has been really impressive.
Yeah, it has. And I think because of the Doughty injury, those minutes are up. I mean, they're up for Anderson, they're up for Gavrikov because of Doughty's injury. But, Joel has proven that he can be a very good penalty killer with the other two defensemen, in Anderson and Gavrikov, as they rotate game for game by game. So, yeah, it's interesting. I was toying with the pairs here before we started this podcast. How about Anderson, Gavrikov, Edmondson, Doughty when you're playing the real good teams and you have to, shut down, a team's top two lines? I mean, I'm sure they're going to go over all these different combinations and permutations, but it's going to be interesting. Only because so many players have probably exceeded their expectations. Gavrikov, number one, because he's moved to the right side and has handled the extra minutes. Edmondson, number two, because he's a new player that has played very well with probably, as you mentioned, Jesse, more minutes than we expected. And even Mikey Anderson. I mean, he plays a lot, has with Doughty over the years, but boy, Mikey Anderson's, I think he's having the best season of his career right now.
Yeah, Dick, I think your last point there, or at least that's where I think the team improves, is that specialized situation personnel usage. Like you can load it up. To start the game, I would start a game the way I said, with the pairs spread out. But yeah, you're right. You get down to late game, you get down to late period, you get down to a penalty kill. You really have way more options. I know it's only one guy coming back in, but it really opens those things up. And then I'm going to, again, I know it's not going to happen. I don't think it will, but I've kind of mentioned, it's not tongue in cheek. It's Gavrikov as the MVP of this team because of the hole he has filled. It was the big hole of Doughty, and he had to move to the other side. He's done that almost seamlessly. So, I just, but Jesse, your point is really well taken. The defense really doesn't have that much room to improve. So, but Drew's moving the puck. Mikey Anderson was talking about that the other day, how it's affected his game not playing with Drew. Now Mikey has to have the puck more. He finds himself in different areas. When Drew gets out there, that's where it's going to be a little bit more. And now that you have Anderson, Gavrikov, and Edmondson, maybe Drew can be a little bit more aggressive offensively than he has been in the past. Just little things to think about.
I would expect late in games, if the Kings are down a goal, we'd see a lot of like Doughty and Clark or Doughty and Spence, paired together to try and chase that offense. The most curious issue to me in the defensive, future is in the summer, Zach Dooley and I caught wind of the idea, and you guys did too as well, obviously, that the Kings would be carrying 8 defensemen to start the season. That was made pretty clear to us. In the offseason. That 8-person group of players included Drew Doughty. Drew Doughty then got injured. The 8-person group now includes Jacob Muvarari, who was recalled from Ontario during the season and put up the lineup from guys that started the season in that 8-man group. So now, upon Drew Doughty's return, do they carry 9 defense? I mean, they can't carry 9. I mean, they can, but I just can't imagine they would. So who's the odd man out? And then, Jim, I'll ask you this. I have heard, I don't know that it is true, but I have heard that offensive players, shooters, need minutes. They need volume in order to get them going, in order to, get the juices going. Do we have to worry about, if Gavrikov loses 5 minutes a night or 4 minutes a night, if Edmondson loses 2 minutes a night, do we have to worry about a reduction in the quality of their play based on not getting out there as often?
It is a concern, but I think it's been proven that there's no better coach than Jim Hiller to put guys in specialized areas and make sure their legs are going. They're not sitting on the bench too much, making sure their game doesn't change. I'm going to go back to the previous point. Specialized personnel, moves, and substitutions. That's how you get Gavrikov more ice time. That's how you get Edmondson more. You really now lock it in to those areas. And I think that it's a point. Well, I'm going to go back and reread it. We're talking to people about it. It's hard to explain, but Pat Riley wrote a book, Lakers coach, ex-coach, and he talked about a season in where Magic Johnson missed a long period of time with a knee injury, and the team was in first place when he returned. And when he returned, they went south. And he said it had nothing to do with X's and O's. It's more about kind of what you're talking about. How does it affect the mentality of players that were doing really good with their best player out, stayed in first place, and yet when he came back, there was that automatic human reaction of not being able to find your same place again. And that will be a concern. But again, I sitting with Jim Hiller, he thinks about those things. Can you counteract it? I'll have to go back to the book of Pat Riley and read it to see exactly how he got himself out of it, because they certainly did get themselves out of it.
Yeah, plenty of success with the Lakers and Magic Johnson. The next question is, will the changes to the special teams yield positive results? It's probably 50-50 because the penalty kill, was excellent last year, so there wasn't a ton of room for improvement this year, Nick. But the penalty kill has been incredibly effective this year. The power play has not. And I would argue that while I was fine with the power play not being terribly effective earlier in the season, I have now begun to see the occasional power play shift where the other team gets momentum as a result of the Kings power play, the way they play.
Yeah, it's been disappointing. You look at the last two games in Calgary, that first power play the Kings had, they had 9 shots on goal, couldn't get a 1-0 lead, wind up losing the game by a goal. In Edmonton, they had the game's first power play. I don't think they might have had 1 shot on goal. So the longer this goes, and a couple things, not getting a lot of power plays. Is that a league-wide trend, or is it just a trend for the Kings? In the last 14 games, the Kings only have had 24 power plays. That's not even 2 a game. So that's where, again, the longer we go here, and it's been all season without Drew Doughty, is he the missing link there? Is he he really is, you look at the makeup of our defense, he really is the only veteran player on the roster that's on defense that has substantial power play experience. So I'm going to say, yeah, he's going to help in that area. But the forwards, so many of the forwards on that first unit just have not been productive. I think Kevin Fiala's gone 2 months without a power play goal. Adrian Kempe has only 2. And he's your leading point producer, your leading goal scorer. So going to be interesting. But Jim and I were talking about this earlier on this trip. Does Jim Hiller consider changing that first unit? I mean, how much longer can you go? Maybe, I don't know. Does he wait till Doughty comes back? That's probably 2 or 3 weeks. Or does he tinker with it before then?
Jim, I stumbled onto a theory, and I don't have any idea if it's true or not, but it's the only thing that makes sense to me about the power play. And I can't remember if it was last season or 2 seasons ago, we were talking to Trevor Moore about penalty killing. And he said the penalty killing is 100% effort. Or maybe that might not be the right word, but I'm going to use it in the interim. And he said that frequently teams on the power play think that they can take a break because they have the man advantage. And so the key, not only on the penalty kill, but also on the power play, is to outwork your opponent during that shift. And given how much work the Kings clearly are putting into defense at 5-on-5, and given how much gas it's taking for them to be as effective as they are, and they truly are, is it possible that on that power play, subconsciously, not deliberately, the Kings maybe are taking an opportunity to rest, not fully rest, but to take the foot off the gas from the 5-on-5 play because they do have the man advantage, and it's rare that another team will really challenge you on a kill because they're going to be in a defensive shell.
Jesse, are you sitting down?
I am.
That is the most impressive explanation I've ever heard.
Thank you.
I think that can be definitely osmosis down to the power play, even to 5-on-5 offense. The Kings are a hard team to play against, and they expend a lot of energy. I'm not going any further because I think you brought up something that is very interesting, and I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to go the other way, personnel changes. Does Laferriere make his way back to the first unit? That right-hand shot issue. They talk about Warren Fogel's shot. I think Warren has been outstanding this year, but I don't see it used a lot. Does Byfield go back to a full-time front net presence? Now, he does go there, but remember last year and before, he was there. He was in front of the net. That was his job, to go there and then go retrieve pucks in the corners. All those types of things. It's probably time to consider personnel changes as opposed to X and O changes. But Jesse, go back, listen to what you just said, write it down, put it in a book.
The reason the thought occurred to me, I think, anyway, I remember watching Adrian Kempe make a play high in the defensive zone. He broke up a pass, but the pass wasn't obviously going to a dangerous area or even necessarily a play that looked to me like the other team. I don't even remember who it was against. He just broke the pass up to break the pass up, right? He wasn't throwing himself in front of a scoring chance. And I just remember thinking to myself, my gosh, they are just disrupting anything, right? It's not reserving the defensive effort for dangerous areas or dangerous moments. They are just 200 feet of sticks in lanes, trying to disrupt what the other team is doing, even if the other team isn't doing anything. And I just thought, my gosh, that must be exhausting.
I don't drink them, but I see people order martinis, dirty. The Kings are dirty. They muck everything up. They just make it unclear for the opposition. It's not clean. And they do. I'm just going to go back to one thing if I can. And point, and maybe consider this. Nick, the Kings are not getting a lot of power plays right, no question. They're not taking a lot of penalties. Jim Hiller, one of his biggest influences was Lou Lamoriello. And if you go back to the teams that Lou was involved in, they are always at the bottom of the league in both power play opportunities and penalty kill opportunity that they have to kill. And I'm just wondering if that's a coincidence, or maybe that's just, again, another osmosis factor where a certain style that's being communicated from the head coach transfers to low event when you talk about special teams.
Yeah, you're right. That could be a factor because to this point in the season, opponents only have like 20, 21 more chances than the Kings have had in the power play. But again, guys, if you're leading the league in defense, that means you're working extra hard, right? Yeah. So doesn't what Jesse said at the start of this little segment and what you echoed, Jim, make sense? If you're going to work your tail off defensively and break up plays all over the ice and become the best defensive team in the NHL, that's expending a lot of energy, time after time, shift after shift.
Nick, you mentioned I echoed that sentiment. I'm not even taking that much credit because I think what Jeff said was absolutely perfect.
Now,
when does the book come out, Jesse?
Yes, next year. You guys are ignoring one obvious possibility for why the Kings don't take a lot of penalties, which of course is that the league hates the Kings and it's a vast conspiracy to work against them. So that's floating out there. The next question is, will Jim Hiller continue to be an unpredictable, creative, unconventional coach in a full season? When we checked in at the quarter poll, I'm not sure that I would have said, yes, as aggressively, but now at the half point, they've been running 11 forwards and 7 defensemen. And Jim, to your point, Jim Hiller, not Jim Fox. Jim Hiller has done an excellent job, obviously, in managing minutes, and not just managing minutes, but managing expectations, right? There are guys who are probably playing way more minutes than they might have thought. There are guys playing fewer minutes than maybe they would have thought. There are guys playing roles. I'm not sure that I would have ever expected to see Quinton Byfield and Warren Foegele start overtime against the Edmonton Oilers with McDavid and Draisaitl on the ice, but we saw just that in early January.
Yeah, and he mentioned it because he didn't do it in a previous game, and he promised him that he was going to do it. So next game, he had to go right back and keep his word. And yeah, it certainly worked there. It is a pretty good unit. I'm going to be very basic on this one. The 11-7, we know about that, but that's the standard now. So that's unconventional. It's been done, but it's rare for other teams. Jim Hiller, to me, bottom line, has an old school philosophy, but he implements things in a new world type of way. And the way he communicates with players. I think the concept of team is so important to hockey. Because, we say basketball, you can have 2-3 players you can win. Baseball, if you have an ace or two in pitchers, then, you're in hockey, you just need more. I think Jim Hiller does that, but he still makes the individual feel important. He doesn't oversell team concept and take too much away from the individual. And I think that's a very difficult concept. That's the new age part, the way he communicates with players, the way he talks things out with players. He doesn't dictate, he converses, those types of things. I think it's working right now. I think it's working to the point where if there's anyone out there who thought the Kings would be where they are right now, especially with Drew Doughty, then I'd like to certainly hear the reasons why they felt that way. But I think Jim has done a great job of I was just going to use the word manipulating, which I don't think he does. I think he puts everything out there on the table, as honest as possible. But underneath it is old world. I mean, he's a Western Hockey League guy. He's not, it's grit is part of that, and he just does it in a way which I think is something that is unconventional. And it's his first time as a full-time head coach. I hope it continues to work.
Nick, in the 2021-22 season, when Drew Doughty was out for, I don't remember how many games, I think it was about 41, the team made the playoffs. They brought in Deneau and Arvidsson and Edler, and Dursey got called up from Ontario, and they made the playoffs for the first time in a while, and it was, I think, maybe a bit of a surprise. It was a surprise to me. I won't speak for anybody else. And the phrase that I used that year to explain it was the power of friendship. I said, the team just came together as a team, to Jim's point. Jim Hiller seems to fully understand the power of friendship, and I use that phrase somewhat tongue-in-cheek. It's a cutesy, funny phrase, but what I'm really getting at is what Jim was just talking about the teamwork and the importance of relying on each other and the sum being greater than the whole of the parts, or whatever the expression is. You see him a lot more frequently than I do. Does that resonate with you in any way? Does that seem like the coach that you're seeing game in and game out?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I'm not in the room, in between periods, but I don't see Jim as a guy who loses it around the players. I think he's very measured with what he's going to communicate to his team. Jim brought up a lot of the points a few moments ago that certainly I can't disagree with. I'm wondering if the team's success to this point, halfway through the season, best defensive record, best home record in the NHL, one of the best records overall, certainly in the top 10. I wonder if that has surprised him, being Jim Hiller, to the point where maybe he has to alter some things. Did he expect this to play out the way it has? Great goaltending from Darcy Kemper. Great play from Joel Edmondson, Warren Foegele. The one thing, and it's only 2 games, the Kings have lost 2 in regulation in a row, only twice this year. That's how consistently good they've been. Is if they go through a little offensive funk, will that force Jim Hiller to tweak some things the way maybe he didn't expect to tweak things? if that makes sense.
Yep. If I can just go back to one thing I said to guys, sorry to. And it's a very difficult thing to discuss because I've never talked to Kevin Fiala about it. But I mentioned in our post-game show after the Edmonton game, I think that Kevin's at a crossroads in his career because I just talked about how Jim makes the individual still feel important in a team concept. If there's one guy they're asking to be less individualistic, it's Kevin Fiala, right? He's risky. So they're asking him to kind of taper that part of his game. That's his So right now he's trying to figure out how he can do that. And he has. He has changed, but then he's become less productive. So there was a balance there last year. Again, we talked the last 25 games of last season where I thought he balanced it perfectly. He was less risky. He wasn't taking the bad penalties, and yet he was still producing. Right now in this group, he's fine. It's difficult. And I don't know if I could even sit down with Kevin. Like, how do you talk to someone? That's such a deep concept, but it's going on. And then just the other general thing about this group, guys, when I hear it from player after player after player, it's we don't want to let the other guy down. That's the feeling I get. When they're out there, they really don't want to let their teammate down.
That's the power of friendship right there.
Yeah.
So, Jim, should I offer up my theory on Kevin Fiala that I mentioned the other night?
Offer it up right now.
Oh, boy.
I'm wondering if the lack of, I don't want to say intensity, but playing on the edge and sometimes going over the edge with some bad penalties here and there, if in trying to pull back, that's affected his overall game, which includes offense. I'm just saying, maybe he needs to have that edge, that kind of what the heck are you doing, Kevin, to his game that makes him who he has been in his career, which has been nearly a point-a-game player.
Nick, you might not catch this reference, but is this a Jamie Tart season 2 of Ted Lasso situation then? Is that what you're...
No, I think Nick is, and it's part of what I just said too. I think he's trying to figure that out. I think during the regular season, Nick, you can live with it. But you get into a playoff series and you take a bad penalty like he has in the past, I think then it just kills the team.
Yeah.
Ever wonder what top athletes eat to perform at their best? Superfood Direct, the preferred catering partner of the LA Kings, is here to fuel your game. For athletes, nutrition isn't just fuel, it's the key to peak performance. Superfood Direct delivers chef-prepared meals that help you build strength, boost endurance, and recover faster. With over 11 years of experience, every meal is balanced with the perfect mix of proteins, carbs, and healthy fats to power you on and off the ice. Ready to fuel your greatness? Visit superfd.com/direct and get 20% off your first order with promo code LA20. That's LA20. All right, we're going to move on to a different forward in the Kings roster, and that's Quinton Byfield. The question was, will Quinton Byfield continue his strong play at center in the preseason? I saw a clip recently of, I think it was Elliot Friedman during an intermission report on a different game broadcast, praising Quinton Byfield for the evolution of his defensive game. And he's only on pace for 40 points this year, which I think if you had told me in September Quinton Byfield's going to have 40 points and you didn't tell me anything else about it, I think I would suggest that would be a disappointment. But based on how he's playing, Jim, I'm not disappointed because he really has become a more effective, at least to my eyes, a more effective defensive player.
Yeah, and recently he has actually been put into shutdown situations.
Yeah.
We've had some games where he's been the guy. Again, the most recent one is Shifley in Winnipeg in that line. And it was Byfield's line's responsibility. Now, the other side of that coin is you're doing part of that to have more options, which hopefully opens up Anze Kopitar and Philippe Deneau for more offensive opportunities. And unfortunately, in this small sample size, since Quinton has been given those responsibilities, the offensive part is not opened up for the other guys.
Byfield and Foegele, you could argue on most nights, are your hardest working forwards defending. And as we said earlier in this conversation, some 20 minutes ago, does all that expended energy towards strong defensive play take away from your ability to create offense?
Yep.
He's also, though, been scoring a bit late. I mean, I know the last few games, but wasn't he on a pretty strong pace there? He had, I'm looking back now, I think he had something 6 goals in 8 games or something like that.
Yeah, that was recently. He had 10 points in the first quarter of the season, 10 points in the second quarter. So he's at 20 points midway through the season. As you mentioned, Jesse, that's 40 points for a season. I think now at age 22, you live with that as long as you're a playoff team and the best defensive team in the NHL. Yeah. But down the road, as we've talked about, he has got to be more involved and more productive, because he is going to be, barring free agencies, trades, he is going to be the number one center in a couple of years.
He has the skill to do it. We know that. We can see that. Again, it's figuring out the game. Again, I think, how the game slows down for him in his mind. I think that's a part of it. And Jesse, you touched on it way back at the beginning here. And I'm just going to go through some numbers because I feel myself now. I'm speaking about me. And I understand the format of a podcast like this, but I feel like I've been too negative. The Kings' record right now, as we're speaking, 7th best in the NHL. And 6 of the top 7 teams are in the West. Even strength goal differential, number 3. Percentage of time leading or tied is first. Now, what does that mean? It means you're in control of the game. Now, then you go to the area of concern. Special teams goal differential, 25th. So there's but I just wanted to bring those numbers up because, we're looking for ways to make it perfect, right? And it's never going to be perfect. But I just found myself, I said going into this podcast, I want to make sure I'm not going to be, man, they're exceeding my expectations. So, and they're doing it. Every coach says we want to come in and make sure we have the defensive structure and that we don't lose that. Well, the Kings have more than done a great job there.
I said this to Eric Stevens this week on our King of the Week segment, Nick. I'm still in all the fan spaces that I used to be in. I don't say as much as I used to. Obviously, I can't. But this season, I find myself understanding less and less the fans that are leaning towards the negative. I understand the emotional hedge of, okay, it's going fine now, but just you wait, something will go wrong. Like, I understand that personally because I try and defend myself against disappointment. It's a personal flaw. I've been working on it my whole life. Yeah. But to Jim's point, the team's been playing incredibly well since that 7-2 loss to San Jose. And I think Jim Hiller even referenced it recently in a post game, or maybe it was a pregame. Since that loss to San Jose, the team's been incredible. I think they're allowing, if it's not fewer than 2 goals a game, it might be just at 2 goals per game, which is astonishing. The offense has dried up recently, but I saw somebody online that says, I don't see how the Kings are going to start scoring 3 goals a game out of nowhere. And I was like, well, they did it earlier. Yeah. Nothing materially has changed. So why?
They've done that in more than half of their games. So where's the argument there? And,
right.
And Jesse, I would say my short response to the fans that kind of lean on the but side, how come it's not better, is, all right, what place are they in and how many teams are in the NHL?
Right.
Okay.
Jim Miller talked today, and it's, again, Jesse, it's your favorite topic. I think it goes to the expected goals situation.
Sure.
He said this little drop, this little sag in offense, he believes our chances that we're creating are higher than earlier when we were scoring more goals. So I think the Kings need to get to better, higher danger areas. Who doesn't? Everyone tries to. But he addressed the sag in offense with, he felt the internal numbers that they get, their analytics are telling them they're creating more chances. and it's just not going in right now.
And sometimes you go into a stretch where you're playing against teams that are playing well, that have good goaltending. I mean, look at Calgary the other night. The number one star of the game was Dustin Wolf, and he made those saves early on in the game, which prevented the Kings from getting a lead, and it was eventually a 1-goal loss for the Kings. But, all these different, and that's something I used to tell the callers, the listeners, Jesse and Jim, when I used to host the talk show after the games. The Kings are playing a team that wants to win too. I mean,
right.
If the Kings win 7-0, the Kings played great tonight. If the Kings lose 7-0, the other team didn't play great tonight. The Kings were awful.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
you've got to balance. You've got to look at it from both sides.
You know what I think? A positive I saw in a loss, a 1-0 loss, the Edmonton Oilers, was this: that first period. We've played games against the Oilers. We've beaten them before. We didn't score, but I don't know if we controlled the period as much as we did. I mentioned it, Nick. I don't even remember. Like, we've been talking over the last couple of years, especially in playoff series, get the Oilers to worry about us a little bit. Well, in that period, they were chasing the Kings as opposed to the other way around. And that's a good sign. And I also mentioned, I think Stuart Skinner played his best game he's ever played against the LA Kings. So let's hope that's just a little dip there because of goaltending and you get back to scoring.
Nick, one of my favorite broadcasters, Tony Kornheiser, says repeatedly, the other team has scouts too. The other team has coaches too.
Yeah.
It's not just what your team does.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Next question. This one's gonna be a little funky because at the beginning of the season, I think we assumed that Alex Laferriere would spend the year on the top line with Kopitar and Kempe. That has not been the case. So, Jim, I guess we'll just change this to, how do you feel about Alex Laferriere's season?
I think if we keep reusing the word that we use, they're capable, yes. Because I think Alex Laferriere was moved off that line to great balance on other lines.
Mm-hmm.
Moved to help other guys as opposed to moved off the line because he wasn't performing. Of course, since he's left that line, his numbers have dropped. But he's capable to play with those guys. I don't think that's a question. It's interesting. I'm just going to mention it now again because it's fresh in my mind. Jim Hiller brought it up today, and guys, it's back to that Lou Lamoriello thing. He was really critical of the penalty Laferriere took against McDavid that ended up being evened up and went to 4-on-4. And that's that. You're never perfect, but it was a retaliation penalty, and I think Jim really wants to nip that in the bud right now.
I was shocked, Nick. I probably should have known this in my mind, but I just was looking up the point totals for the Kings players this season, and Alex Laferriere is third on the team with 26 points. I didn't realize he was that high in team scoring.
Yeah, well, it got off to the great start, right?
Yeah.
9 goals in the first quarter, 4 in the second. I think he, doing my notes for the Vancouver game in a couple of days, 1 goal in his last 14 games. But he's not the only one. It's dried up a little bit. It's really, I think it's the first time this year we have said, okay, are the Kings going to go through a little bit of an offensive slump here, and they're going to lose the 1-goal games that they've been used to winning up until this point. So he's not the only guy. I mean, Phil Deneau, even Anjay slowed a bit production-wise. We've talked about Fiala earlier, and these are guys that are playing big minutes. A lot of them play on the power play. So, but to Jim's point, yeah, he's one of those players where, and we saw it last year and Todd McClellan mentioned it in Laferriere's rookie year. He would mention kind of off the cuff to us, well, it's because he's cleaning up everybody's mistakes on the line he's with, Laferriere, that is. So, yeah, I think he's going to be a very good NHL player, and he'll get his share of points. And again, he's not on the power play anymore, not in the first unit. Maybe that change will come in the next couple of games or a couple of weeks, who knows. So, yeah, way more positives for Alex Laferriere than there are negatives.
We're going to move on to our next question, which is, will the added players have the desired impact I don't think you can criticize a single one of the players that the Kings added in the offseason, either from trade or free agency. Jeannot, Edmondson, Fogle, Kemper, they've all filled the role that they were asked to fill. Perhaps you might have liked a little bit more offense from Tanner Jeannot, but I mean, that's nitpicking. They've all done the job they were asked, I think, Jim.
I'm just going to go numerically, just point blank. Edmondson. Shut down, stayed home guy on the NHL's stingiest hockey team.
Mm-hmm.
Jeannot, tough to rate because you can't calculate his value based on points. But we've heard that the Kings are much more difficult to play against, and there is that now intimidation factor. That's what he brings. Kemper can't remember the last bad goal that went in against him. And he has stolen games, Nick. We've talked about that. He has stolen some games, which every once in a while, the team that does, relies on defense, you need that. And then Warren Fogle, hockey IQ without the puck, angles, smart stick, closing speed with the puck. Want to see a shot a little bit more, but hey, pretty good grades for those guys.
Yep. You look at Fogle plus minus among the top 20 in the NHL, not just among the best on the team, which he is, but among the best in the league. And Kemper's goals against and save percentage with the run he's been on, second and third. Really, the only guy with better numbers is Connor Hellebuck, who's probably the odds-on to win the Vezina at this point. And the penalty kill has been a strong suit. Edmondson again. Jeannot leads the team in hits by far, and he doesn't get the ice time the other players get. So he's playing his role. Yeah, they've all been great fits.
Let's use that to springboard into the next question, which is how will goaltending impact the season? My hunch at the beginning of the season was that probably little would change because defense has obviously been the focus of this team for quite a while. Last 3 seasons, the defensive numbers have been very good. Obviously, that's continued this season. But Jim, what can a goaltender's personality do to the mix in the room? We talk about the power of friendship. Darcy Kemper, you said not allowing a bad goal that you can remember. He's always got a big smile on his face every time I've talked to him. He seems like a very pleasant guy. It's his second time through LA.
Isn't it interesting, Jesse, that David Riddick and Darcy Kemper have completely different personalities?
Yes, they do.
No?
Yes,
so that's,
they do.
The experience, Stanley Cup, control. David Riddick is more fun-loving, active, out there, talkative. I'm just going to go to a rating system. On expectations, let's just rate them right now. The goaltending as a unit for the Kings, I give them an A. And if I were to rate them based on my expectations going into the season, I give them an A+.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Kemper's numbers league-wise, where it stands with his goals against and save percentage, and that's overall. And then you look at Riddick, his record at home, it's the best in the NHL. So you've got both goaltenders who are either at the top or near the top in different goaltending categories. How much more do you want?
Not much. Same. Give me more.
Yeah.
The same.
My concern about the goaltending this season, and I've repeated it time and time again, was that you were spending more on goaltending than you did last season. And last season, the goaltending was real good. And so it would just be really difficult from a value standpoint to extract more value by paying more for the position. But I certainly don't think they've lost any value at the position. And, I've always said any given year, there's between 3 and 8 goaltenders that actually matter. The rest of them are just guys. You don't know at the beginning of the year which 4 through 8 are going to be. And, every year there's 1 or 2 guys that are there, like Connor Hellebuck, he's going to be a guy, right? But after that, it's sort of, you don't know. And I think Darcy Kemper has been one of those 3 to 8 goaltenders this year.
Yeah, you look at the goaltending position, and it'd be interesting to find out what the average team spend on their two goaltenders. The Kings are probably around $6 million with Kemper and Riddick. Kemper getting the bulk of that. Mm-hmm. But if that's around the league average, I'm going to guess it probably is. Then no issues with either one.
Yeah. The next one, and this is a way to, Jim, if you want to get some negativity in here, way to do it without being negative towards the Kings. How will the rest of the Pacific Division Western Conference perform? Unfortunately for the Kings, only a handful of teams have been better than them since late November. And unfortunately, Vegas and Edmonton are two of them. The Kings went on that incredible run and gained no ground in the Pacific Division standings. Well, I shouldn't say that. They put some people further behind them. But as far as chasing the two teams ahead of them, it's been very difficult to make up ground.
On the whole, just keep playing the way the Kings have been playing and don't worry about the other guys. That's the way, because, Vegas is good, Edmonton's good. We knew that. I think Anaheim, San Jose, and we talked about it. We knew they would no longer be easy points, and they're not. Calgary's hanging in there longer than people thought. Vancouver was the most interesting because the internal issues they talk about, if they're resolved, are they resolved with a trade? If so, does that mean different personnel? You have to, but, right now, if there's the biggest drop re-expectations, it's Seattle.
It's interesting. When the Kings started their 6-game winning streak after that loss in San Jose, they came home and played what a lot of people feel was their best game against Winnipeg. That started the 6-game winning streak, started the run where they're 13-4-2 now in their last 19. When they started that streak, the Winnipeg game back in, November, they had a 3-point cushion over the nearest non-playoff team. With as well as they have played, right now that cushion is 5 points over the nearest non-playoff team. But to Jim's point, here's the thing. They have distanced themselves between more teams. There are a couple in the mix, Calgary, Vancouver. I don't know who else would be there. Maybe, I don't know. Anaheim is still 10-11 back. But my point is, you keep playing that well, and Jim mentioned it, don't worry about the other teams because you're going to put some more distance between yourselves and more teams than not. So now the Kings have fewer teams to worry about to stay ahead of in the second half.
I keep referring back to that San Jose game, and since that game, in the 19 games since that game, the Kings are 13-4-2 with a .737 point percentage. That's third best in the league during that stretch. The only two teams with better points percentage than the Kings during that stretch are Edmonton and Vegas.
Yeah. And Jim was talking about Vancouver, and it's interesting because our next game is with Vancouver on this trip. Mm-hmm. The Canucks are under 500 at home. They have a much better road record. They're 7-8-6 at home, and they lead the league with overtime shootout losses with 10. So if you split those 10 games, that's 5 more points they get. And where does that put them? Ahead of the Kings, ahead of Calgary. So, and Jim touched on the internal issues that people are starting to bring up with them. And Demko's been hurt, although he's back now. Lankinen's been a very capable fill-in and is getting a share of starts. But, if you continue to play as well as the Kings are, you're going to be just fine because eventually the teams behind you will just start falling off the cliff.
You talked about Vancouver, Nick. I'm just going to their home record. Well, who's talking about all these internal issues? The local media. And that's right. All they hear about. That's all they hear about. And maybe that just has an effect on them.
That's going to bring us to our final question before we let you guys get back to your evening. And that is, what do the Kings have to do to make sure that those teams behind them don't pass them? What do the Kings have to do to make the playoffs, Jim?
Well, I'm going to go through a list that I drew up here, and it's a lot of them have nothing to do with me telling anyone something they don't know. Power play.
Yeah. I've got that in all caps on my
Okay,
head.
draw more. Maybe that's not going to happen. Front net. That's going to be an issue I'm going to keep an eye on. Front net. Can that be a factor for the Kings on the power play? Kevin Fiala talked about his internal fight right now. One thing I love from Kevin right now is this. He has changed his game to the way they want him to play. That's an unselfish attitude from a very creative player. I made a point earlier. That's great, though. Maybe he needs that edge. Maybe he needs that little fly off the handle every once in a while. If I were to say anything to Kevin right now, make a play. The first one you see, that's the play you make. Doughty's bounce. Got to make sure that's a positive bounce. It will be in the long run. There's no question. No question in my mind. But make sure it doesn't affect the team like we talked about with the Pat Riley situation. Depth scoring, Byfield, Fogle, Laferriere, Trevor Moore, Deneau, And then just, you keep Turcotte on the top line. He's been fine. You can't have 3 30-goal scorers on the same line. It doesn't happen. Maybe it happens once or twice. There might be 1 or 2 around the league. It's just so rare. He's been more than fine, but I'm just wondering, again, when you're trying to jumpstart things, do you move other guys around to play with Kempe and Kopitar to get them going? So it's less to do with Turcotte and his play and more to do with, can you get depth scoring by putting guys with the top dog?
Yeah, the 2 things that I'm looking ahead to are the month of January. This 5-game trip, you're home for 2 next week, then another 5-game trip. And after that, the Kings will have 22 of their final 32 games at home, counting the makeup with Calgary, which may come at the end of the year. So with their home record and all of those home games, for me, if they can get through January with these road games, even 500, and that would be about the time that Doughty comes back at the end of this month, if his presence doesn't, I don't want to say force the Kings or make the Kings change their ways, if they can continue the course even when he's in the lineup, then I think everything is going to be fine.
Yeah, I'm going to use Jim's words. I think they've got to just play the way they've been playing and not worry about everybody else. And I think they've demonstrated that they're a capable team. We're going to wrap it up here. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. As always, these conversations are the highlights of my season. Nick, Jim, big thanks to both of you.
Thank you, Jesse. Always a pleasure.
Jess, I can't wait for the book to come out. Thanks.
Next year.